After the nuclear fallout and once the first few groups of people resurfaced from their bunkers, they didn't stay united under the flags of Vault Tech nor the Star-Spangled Banner. Instead, several new groups were founded, some raiders, while others intended to create republics or dictatorial states. We are a part of the Raiders, and for a long time we reigned around Sac City, with the I-80 highway being an important part of our raider culture. However, even though we had the region under our cars and motorbikes, the new Californian Republic violently kicked us out of our native lands and forced us to flee east into Utah. It took many battles to establish our presence in the area, but in the end, after defeating the likes of New Canaan, the Whitelegs and many more, we could turn off our motors and settle down in the oasis, also known as Wendover. But while the older generations of our raider group were happy to settle down, the younger have been growing more and more revengeful each day, wanting to return to California and defeat the Republic. And the leader of the youth, called Thunderbird, has been growing more influential as well, with more and more of our group agreeing that we shouldn't settle down. We have been raiders, we are raiders, and we will always be raiders. So we started to tributize our neighbors, starting with the smallest, who all agreed to pay a tax for us not to raid them. In the end, the only two groups who refused were New Canaan and the Whitelegs. And thus we staged a raid on New Canaan. The battle that followed was harsh, and after more than a month it was deemed impossible to break through their defenses as the border conflict turned into a stalemate. But this loss hasn't proven the elders right. No, we are now more energized than ever, and we even have easier targets to attack. Because Eastport and the Timekeepers both refused to pay tribute in the end. And following our loss, the rest followed suit, so we have plenty of areas to raid now. We started in the weaker East, but once again it ended in a stalemate, so we need to change something if we even want to be able to think about reclaiming Sac City. And fortunately, work has already started in the areas where we reign. The so-called pedestrians are being assimilated so that they can help us as craftsmen, for example to refurbish cars that simply lie around our controlled lands. The refurbishment has also helped us develop our own existing vehicles, and in maybe 300 days we could start salvage cars at a much larger scale. Then, even though we failed all our raids, we still got some profit as we could scavenge a lot of equipment from deaths on the other side. Equipment which has allowed us to equip our raiders with dynamite, fire teams and recon companies. This reinvigorated our belief in Thunderbird, especially after it successfully returned with the heads of several death claws. So we launched a raid against New Hammond, and this time our motorbikes and cars rapidly overwhelmed their forces and secured a quick victory. Then we returned to the east, where we got our revenge and could pillage their lands. And thus, with 2 consecutive victories, Thunderbird has shown that it is possible to return home, and we are now ready to begin the long journey. We will begin with one specific area, Ruby Valley, because its inhabitants were people who fled from us during the drive east, which means we are already familiar. However, they aren't in control over the region anymore, as some raiders from the west took over it. But these raiders don't scare us, and we demanded the area straight away. Probably knowing about our recent victories, they retreated from the area almost immediately, which made it easy to then integrate the main settlement. So with the first step of reclaiming the I-80 already done, there is no slowing us down. Especially since back home another 156 men have been trained in our ways of raiding, shooting our numbers up to almost 4,000. And the first who will face this mighty force will be the same raiders who retreated from Ruby Valley, since we know that they are weak. And we weren't wrong. Our motorized forces broke through their defenses almost immediately, and with our speed they had it difficult to retreat, with some forces even being encircled. After capturing Jigs, they collapsed even more as we had free reign over their wastelands and could split their forces in 2. The southern ones were easily crushed, but to their credit, the units in their capital were harder to defeat. But not hard enough, and we had soon forced them to surrender or flee completely. During this campaign, Thunderbird had developed new methods to help us fight in rougher terrains as well. But more importantly, the next expansion was prepared, also here in the south, against the Grabber territory. Also being raiders, they didn't stand a chance against our superior and faster raiding skills. And even though they encircled one of our forces, we encircled more and could save ours, something which they weren't capable of doing. So just like the previous raiders, these two were easily defeated. We then decided to take a pause in our expansion to integrate the major settlements of our newly conquered area, Crescent Valley and City 318. However, our neighbor disagreed with any kind of pause, because only a few days later we received a strongly worded demand from our new western neighbor, the 215th, our number rival, since they too are a group of raiders, demanding our newly conquered lands. Despite having double the wealth and close to double the number of deployed men, we of course refused, which led to war some days later. This wasn't really what we prepared for, since we actually wanted to focus on New Hammond and Eastport, but it doesn't really matter in the end, because we would have invaded them nonetheless. And they aren't as strong as they seem, because they are overestimating themselves and preparing to attack New Reno and Vault City as well. So we are still certain we will win, especially since we are soon conscripting 8 new divisions, and so we started the hardest battle yet. After little less than a year of fighting, we defeated the 215th and our northern neighbors, since the I-80 goes here, not in the south. However, we didn't keep all the lands we conquered, as we retreated from the westernmost territories in order to keep New Reno from attacking us. Due to all our victories, the popularity of Thunderbird has only risen. However, even he agrees that it is time to slow down. At least for now, because we need to put our now huge area completely under our control, instead of letting resistance that currently exists to root itself down. The main problem we face is lack of manpower. Fortunately, there are plenty of scums and villains who are willing to join our bands, and immigration to our main lands has also helped. We've also been able to core the 2 main settlements of New Hammond and Eastport. This was enough to put the resistance under control, meaning other areas could be focused on. For example, recruiting scientists from around our new lands, and more importantly, we recreated an old institution, the Road Builders. And so Thunderbird felt ready to restart offensive matters, especially since rumors had started spreading that the NCR had engulfed in chaos. However, despite this growing his popularity, resistance to his ideas was still met, as the elders seek to continue our pause and only focus on Utah. Long debates followed that no one could win, so in the end a compromise was established. Our group would split up completely. Almost all raiders joined Thunderbird and drove north, while the southern lands were put under the control of the elders, together with most of the industry and non-raider institutions. But despite this being a huge bump in our drive to Sac City, our faith still lies in Thunderbird and the I-80 highway. And so we will immediately start a journey, which begins with going to Vault City, which has been taken over by mole rats. But we didn't start with the rats, we started with their eastern and weaker neighbor, El Copose. However, they weren't that weak, and it was actually they who started the first attack. Fortunately, it saw little successes, as we could use it to our advantage and try to split their country in 2. While we did achieve it, we managed to reunite the country shortly after, stopping our offensive action at the same time. It was only after they started attacking us again that we could gain some ground, mainly their capital. This was how it continued until we at last split their forces in several different pockets and captured their last settlement. So we can now turn to the rats. Fortunately, rats can't outrun our motorbikes. However, unfortunately, they have humans fighting for them, and the rats are a plague to our supply. But we didn't give up and tried to use our encirclement tactics in the north instead. And here it was actually successful, even though they started their own attack during our operation. So confident in another successful attack, we retried it in the same area, which went well at first, but once we had to close the encirclement we got stuck. And soon as supply ran low, we were forced to retreat back. After this retreat, our offensive fully stopped as the rats now started bashing against our line, even taking back some of their land. Fortunately, in the end, we could hold them all back. Then a savior would arrive. The super mutants in the north declared war on the rats. So we immediately restarted our offensives and arrived to Gastown. Then we turned to the south, since most rats had left the area to the north. So we broke through immediately and almost arrived all the way to Vault City. The final battle that followed was harsh, but in the end we achieved victory over the rats and could take over Vault City. And this means there is only one nation left before we can go to California, the incredibly strong New Reno. So we took some time to prepare, coring our lands back home, and just like always the two main settlements, Vault City and Elko. We also trained 10 extra divisions because they will be needed against their 35 to 156 divisions. Our plan is to hold out for as long as possible and then just pray that we will be able to attack at one point. But then something changed that ruined our whole plan. The troll Warren declared war on New Reno and got absolutely crushed. Something which made our front line with New Reno twice as big. And this has put us in a tough position. The front is too big for us to win right now, but if we don't declare war, New Reno will grow even stronger, as they are not only building up an air force but also tanks which outmatch our own forces. And since Thunderbird can't argue for a long and slow build-up, as that would destroy his popularity, we were forced into retreating back to Mountain City and Elko and then declare war. The first battle that took place was in the north, where we safely won 2 of the 3 battles and had to reinforce the third to win it. But we didn't forget our offensive routes and used this attack to take over a small settlement which shortened our front. A while later, as the first New Reno forces arrived to the south as well, they restarted their offensive in the north, and this time their tanks melted our defenses, allowing them to break our defensive lines. We would try our best to push them back, but with an air force bombing us from the sky and them soon applying what they had learned here in the north to the rest of the front, we had to give up. Especially since their offensive in the south almost reached Elko City, and they could capture Mountain City in the north as well. The next of their attacks would be even more successful as Elko and another city fell, bringing us close to 50% surrendering. And the one after that reached lands that we had had in years. However, something had changed. We've killed almost 6,000 of their men, which has reduced their available manpower to less than 1,000. So it is now or never if we want any chance to win this war. But then, before we even advanced a meter, excellent news reached us from across the wastelands. Caesar's legion invaded what was left of California, and this government was allied with New Reno, which means we are now allied with Caesar. So this not only drew away New Reno forces from our front, but we will also be able to open talks with Caesar about our relations. Back to our attack, it took some time to break through, but once we did, we could at last utilize the speed of our forces to recapture Elko and encircle our first few divisions. And so the war had seemingly turned. We staged another encirclement operation more north, which was just as successful and recaptured 2 cities. Then, even though we hadn't cleared it out, we continued in the south by surrounding another 4 divisions. Their amount of divisions had now been severely reduced as Caesar had crushed California and arrived to New Reno. So our most elite raiders were sent driving through the wasteland all the way to their capital, and with them not being ready for our speed, we arrived without battles. They wouldn't surrender immediately, however, as their lines had already collapsed, they didn't have much left to live and eventually surrendered. So we had done it. Thunderbird turned this hopeless war to one where we won, and during all this time the few diplomats we have been able to make an agreement with Caesar. We will be allowed to return to Sac City and the surrounding lands in return for a non-aggression pact. And so we have done it. We are back home in California, and there is no NCR who are here to kick us back out. The I-80 is also once again fully ours. So thanks so much for watching, and the reason this video is shorter than usual is because I'm probably on vacation right now. Anyways, have a great day and see you in the next video.